Greetings and welcome back. Becoming Undone is a podcast for those who dare bravely, risk mightily, and grow relentlessly. Join me, Toby Brooks, as I invite a new guest each week where we can examine how high achievers can transform from falling apart to falling into place. And for the next several weeks, we're taking a deep dive into the life, the lessons, and the legacy of Dick Tomey. Super excited about tonight's guest. Joining me is Coach Rip Scherer from his early days on Dick Tomey's first head coach staff at the University of Hawaii to Arizona, and he's gone on and done some great things. Rip's seen it all. So, Coach Scherer, thanks and welcome to the show.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Toby. As I said to you earlier, a chance to talk about Dick Tomey is it's a no-brainer. It's exciting for me.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited because you were there when he set foot on Hawaiian soil as a head coach for the first time in his career. You also crossed paths again in the U of A year. So we're going to dig into all of that. Let's start at the beginning, though. You were at Hawaii, part of Larry Price's staff, and this new guy comes in, late 70s, and he brings a couple of folks with him. Talk to us a little bit about that transition and what it meant for you personally as a young coach.
Well, interestingly enough, I was hired by Larry Price in February of 1977, Dick's first year. So I never coached a game with Larry Price. I was there. I was on recruiting trip I was actually in Pittsburgh, which is my home, and I get a phone call that Larry resigned. And so obviously it created a lot of turmoil in a lot of people's lives. I flew back. We didn't know who was going to get the job, who wasn't. A lot of significant names were mentioned and interviewed. And I really didn't have any connection with. I was an East Coast guy, and most of the guys were being interviewed were West Coast guys like Dick. So my dad was a high school football coach for years in Pittsburgh, and knew a guy by the name of Frank Gans who was on the UCLA staff. So my dad reached out to Frank Gans on my behalf, and I knew Coach Gans because he had created an opportunity for me to be a GA at Oklahoma State. So I had some background with him. So he was able at least to get my name in front of Dick throughout this whole process. But I was hired as the offensive coordinator, quarterback coach by Coach Price. And then obviously, as I said, that thing unraveled. And Dick comes in and he told me, you're not going to be the coordinator. I'm bringing a guy in, Mike Flores, to be the offensive coordinator. His term was more offensive organizer, but Miguel served as the offensive coordinator. And I became the running back coach and was in charge of the run game. And Mike and I just hit it off. We work seamlessly. We've been friends for since 1977, whatever that was. And we literally speak once a week to this day.
Yeah.
So, I was on, obviously on eggshells. I mean, fortunately we had no kids. My wife and I were there living in Hawaii, and Dick said he would evaluate us as the season went on. And, we hit the ground running, and it was a blur from the time he got there in late June, early July. I think we brought in maybe 25 to 30% of the roster turned over. And that was before the days of obviously the transfer portal and everything else. So it was chaotic, and trying to keep good players there. And Dick, because of his connections, significantly upgraded the personnel on the team. And he was a recruiting mastermind from that point on. So it was an interesting time frame.
Yeah. And I pointed this out in the episode with Mike and mentioned a lot of staffs. First of all, you've been a part of these types of transitions on both ends. And knowing that a staff is partially staying behind and some new blood coming in, that's kind of a recipe for disaster for a lot of places. And it really takes a special leader to knit those together. Was there anything specific about Coach Tomey with the two folks he brought in and with the existing staff that he did to cement you together as a cohesive unit as opposed to Larry's guys versus his guys?
Well, just his aura and his personality, he wasn't going to tolerate anything but cohesiveness and uh, camaraderie and working together. And he made it known from the very get-go. Actually, ironically, Bob Wagner was in the same situation I was in. He eventually became the head coach at the UH, as you know. But Bob and I were the in-between new guys. And but Dick just, in our staff meetings, was just constantly preaching team. His Bo Schembechler background came out, and always talking about the team. Mm-hmm. And no individual, no coach, nobody was more important than the team.
Yeah.
And so that became very obvious that if you weren't going to get on board with that, you weren't going to be around very long.
Right.
And so, Bob Burke came in and Mike, and they were both good guys. They blended in. They didn't come in like hey, we're the good guys now and you guys are the bad guys. And Dick treated everybody the same. And really, it was pretty seamless. I'm surprised we could get out of the huddle, but we managed to put together a respectable year that first year.
Yeah. And I've backpedaled a little bit on my earlier, like in episode 1, I talked about how Coach Tomey's recruiting status, he wasn't known necessarily for signing 5-star guys, but that was really more of a reflection of where he was. He wasn't at an Alabama. He wasn't at a Texas. He was recruiting team guys who he could mold into what he wanted. And repeatedly, I've had several interviews where people talk about how he was the best recruiter that someone had been around. He could make connections and that human side. So I'm curious, your first few years there on the island working with Hawaii, what did you take away from recruiting as a part of his staff?
Well, recruiting was the lifeblood of the program, and Dick made sure that you were aware of that every day. We met on recruiting, some phase of recruiting every day, and most Thursdays we would have an intensive recruiting meeting. We would do recruiting role playing, and he'd walk in the recruiting meeting and just like out of the blue go, "Okay, Rip, you're recruiting Mike Flores here. Mike's a big-time junior college prospect out of Santa Monica, and he has these offers. And and so you would then go through, like, you're meeting him at the school, and you would start like, you'd kind of go into but at some point Dick would go, hey, no, we're not saying that. That's not the way we're going to phrase that. So Dick was really unique. I took meticulous notes in those recruiting meetings that I referred to literally 30 years later. I would go back before recruiting every year and look at my UH recruiting notes. And he was just big on, like, you want to be different. He was like, he would not allow you to meet with a prospect in the coach's office, which is 99% of the time where you coaches would meet with prospects. But he wanted you to take him someplace different, and little tiny things like, hey, walk me to your favorite place on your school campus. And then it might be sitting on top of the stadium at the top row. And you'd sit up there and recruit and talk to the guy. And it wasn't, it was all relationship based. Dick would be nuts in today's world of the NIL and, that's chased so many good coaches out, because it was all relationship based and get to know the significant people in his life. And if Coach Tomey came in to visit that kid in the school later in the year, he might say to him, hey, take me where you met with Coach Scherer. Well, if he said, well, we met here in the coach's office, you were in trouble. And that happened to me one time. The kid says, well, I think we met. And I go, no. Remember, we met in, because I didn't want to get chewed out in the road on the way out of the school. But it was just all about being different. Dick would walk into a home visit and, as I heard Mike allude to, but like literally plop down on the floor. Everybody's kind of finding a place on the couch and the chairs to sit. And Dick would plop on the floor and start his talking to never addressing the prospect initially. I mean, the mom, the dad, the little sister, petting the dog, whatever it was, but kind of gaining the confidence of this family that I can entrust my son to this group of men. And it's not about what they can do for him on the field. It's what they will do for him academically, personal growth wise, those types of things.
Yeah, I think those are certainly valuable lessons. And so you leave U of H and head to Virginia, Alabama. You kind of make some other stops, and then your paths cross again, and you head back to Arizona once Coach Tomey heads that way. So talk me through how that transition came about. What was that conversation like when he called to talk to you about the job?
Well, so real quick, I went to Virginia, and then while I was at Virginia, after the first year, I actually got hired by a guy by the name of Bo Ryan, who took the head job at LSU. And I was with Bo for 6 weeks, and Bo was killed in a plane crash, private plane crash. So I was not retained by the new head coach that came in, and Dick Tomey on his own called Bill Curry, who just had gotten the head job at Georgia Tech. And then Dick calls me and says, "Hey, I've talked to Bill Curry at Georgia Tech. He's looking to hire a quarterback coach. I think he wants to talk to you." So he connected, unbeknownst to me. I didn't ask him to do that, but he had met Bill Curry at the Pro Bowl in Hawaii back then. So so I go to Georgia Tech for 7 years with Bill, go to Alabama for 1 year. I was the coordinator. I was 32 years old. We went 7-5. And I was not the most popular guy in Tuscaloosa. And Bill called me in after the end of the season, and he said, "I have to sacrifice one to save the other 8. And you're the one they want." So I got let go, and Dick was the first guy that called me. And he said, "Listen, I don't have a spot on my staff, but we're going to create a position here." So I literally went there as like the assistant AD in charge of football, overseeing football, and being a conduit with the AD in the program. And then I sat in all the meetings. I went to training camp. I learned the offense and would sit in the press box during games and help out a little bit with the coordinator. And at the end of the season, Dick decided to make a change of what we were doing offensively. We were very much a option team, and he wanted to incorporate more of a passing game into that. So he made me the coordinator, and I was there for 2 more seasons as a coordinator. Actually, we actually rented a house in Tucson because I didn't know how long I would be there. And then sure enough, we finally bought a house, moved in June. And at the end of that season, I got the head job at JMU. Again, through Dick's calling the president and the AD on my behalf. Dick and Joe Paterno actually were the 2 big drivers behind that. And, it was a great experience. I was at the beginning of the Desert Swarm era. All those guys were recruited as I was leaving, but you could see it building in that direction, and you could see where it was heading. And what he built there.
I love the let me rephrase that. I love the selflessness illustrated there. You're not even a member of his staff, and he's calling and advocating for you for jobs. And then you are a member of his staff, and he's advocating for you for head positions, recognizing that he's not gaining anything out of it. If anything, it's making life harder for him because things are rolling, and now he's having to upgrade or otherwise fill holes in his staff. What did
Dick
you
was
take?
The most selfless guy. We would have staff retreats at the U of A, and we would have alums give us houses, big houses up in Mount Lemmon. You're familiar with that area, I know. But it was amazing because Dick would put the graduate assistants in the master bedrooms, in the biggest bedrooms, in the nicest rooms, and so the further up you were on the structure, the lesser your quarters were. I mean, Dick would sleep on the couch.
Wow.
Dick would sleep on the couch, and he had GAs staying in the master bedrooms.
Man.
He was he was unbelievable like that. We went on a recruiting trip. We were recruiting a quarterback in Florida. He and I were in Fort Lauderdale, and we hadn't. We get to the hotel, and Dick, you didn't get two separate rooms. You stayed in the same room with Dick. So I was an old school guy, and that time you had to call and get an iron, and I'm ironing my shirt and I'm getting my sport coat ready. And Dick's sitting there on the bed, and he had rolled his sport coat up like a towel and just kind of shook it out. And he said, as a quarterback, they ended up going to Notre Dame. And he said, we haven't met this guy yet. I said, no. He goes, you're going to look a lot more like a head coach than I am. He goes, why don't we tell him you're the head coach? And I said, no, Dick, he was, tongue in cheek, but he was self-deprecating, but as the flip side of it was, he was as intense and competitive as you could ever imagine.
Yeah, and I think that's what's come out in so many of these interviews is he is really a study in extremes that on paper don't really match. How can you be such a fierce competitor and expect so much out of people, but yet be so beloved by them? Ordinarily, that's a tyrant, right? That's a person no one wants to play for. But that wasn't him at all. It was just the opposite. This is a guy that people would go to war for and would do anything for because they knew he cared so much.
Well, the adage of they don't care what you know until they know that you care, something I learned from my dad, actually, but Dick carried that all the time. And our first game at UH as a staff, I think, was against Colorado State. And Mike and I were both in the press box, and Mike Flores. And Mike was basically calling the passing game, and I would call the run game. And Dick was the best guy to work for, except on Saturdays. Saturday, he literally, when I was at Arizona, he would get on the phone before the game and go, "Hey guys, I apologize for what I'm going to say in the next 3.5 hours." And I hardly, I've only been with the guy like 6 weeks, and we're in this game, and he's questioning every call. Like, why are we calling that? Why did we do that? That only made 2 years. And I lost it. I go, "Would you shut the hell up?" And then Mike and I look at each other, and I go, "Oh shit, I'm done. I'm done. My career is over." And Dick he calls the manager over and goes, "Hey, take this headset. I'm screwing those guys up upstairs." And he took the headset off and walked away. And after the game, we didn't win, I don't believe. I think we lost. But I was sheepishly walking into the locker room, and Dick's like, "Hey guys, and he would capture a moment. He goes, we're in the coach's locker room. And he goes, "Hey, I'm bugging those guys upstairs, and I don't know." And then Rip just tells me to shut the hell up. And you know what? He told me exactly what he thought, and I needed to do that. And I was like, oh my God, I thought I was going to get ripped, fired, whatever. So, he was unique, and he and I would get into it at Arizona. I was a little bit more established, and we would get into it on game day, like two little kids arguing, and he never held it against us. Yeah. Never held it against you.
Right. Well, I think that's another thing that's come up is there's a personality behind it. He's not just looking for getting the W at any cost. He's looking to build relationships, pour into people. Beyond the X's and O's, what personal or professional lessons do you feel like you walked away from Coach Tomey having learned?
Well, you use the term, and it's said so much as it applies to Dick, but it is relationship. It's relationship based. He knew he didn't just know your wife's name. He knew her background. He knew her interest. You'd go over their house on recruiting weekends. We didn't take the prospects out to extravagant breakfast. We had breakfast on Sunday morning, the last morning of recruiting weekend, at Dick's house. And the wives would all come, and they would make breakfast. It wasn't like it was catered. They were scrambling the eggs, cooking the bacon, doing the toast. But he would sit there and, after all the prospects had cleared out, sit there with your wife and just say, how you doing? I mean, how's your job going? Just take a really personal interest in your kids. He wanted them around. From the time I worked with Dick, and then I became a head coach for 10 years, his schedule is something that I adopted all the time. And then I got other coaches to adopt it that I worked for. We came in early. Dick's philosophy was, hey, your morning time at home, the kids getting ready for school, everybody's getting ready for, it's not quality time. So we're going to come in here at 6 o'clock and we're going to start, but you're going to be home by dinner time. So in the evening, you can be with your kids. And he was adamant about that. He would chase you out, get out of here. We're going to be in here at 6. You can't stay in here till midnight and expect to be productive tomorrow morning at 6. So get home, get with your family. And I carried that through in every one of my head coaching positions, and some where I had some influence or say with the head coach to convince him to do things like that. It was all based on relationship, family, caring about people.
Mm-hmm. And I think beyond that, he isn't just a relationships person. He also is a leader and a cultivator of leaders. And that's kind of a signal of a great leader, is how many leaders do you produce? So the fact that you go from your position at Arizona to a head coaching job at JMU and then eventually Memphis, talk to me about that transition to head coaching for you and what role maybe Coach Tomey played as you made the jump. And Coach Brent Brennan was on earlier and he said, they don't make a manual for this thing as a head coach, but having Coach Tomey there was a critical part of his success.
The first day in my office at JMU, after most of the day, and it was a turnstile with people coming in the door and wanting to see you, and you had this and academics, and I called Dick and I said, hey Dick, same thing Brett said. I said, I've been looking all over for the manual in this desk. There's no manual. He goes, figure it out on your own. You'll do fine. Just go with your gut. And those first months, and he was so patient, and you could call him anytime, he just would guide me through things, but not tell me what to do. But okay, think about this. Think about this. He'd give you a different perspective on it, and you'd walk away with a much clearer idea of what I need to do now, what I have to do, and or what should be done. And I'll give you an interesting story too, because he is an early morning guy, and Dick was like all the time, like if he wanted you to ask something from a high school coach or something, and you'd come in the next morning and go, Coach, I called him, and he goes, well, did you try him at 6 o'clock in the morning at home? And I go, no, or we would go, no. But when I went for my second interview at Memphis, and I was sitting down with the president, and somehow Dick's name came up, and he goes, well, I want you to know Dick Tomey really thinks the world of you. And I go, yeah, he's been great for me. He goes, yeah, he called me at 6 o'clock in the morning to tell me about you. And I said, okay, that makes sense. He knew you were going to be home.
Yeah.
So
I love that. People are free at that time, generally speaking, so you can't argue the logic, right? Well, so you have had a storied career, NFL, head coach in collegiate ranks, professional, otherwise. So talk me through how you've seen Coach Tomey's coaching impact kind of bubble to the surface in all your various roles, whether it's oh my goodness, I'm gonna have to edit all this out, whether it's as a head coach or in assistant roles.
Well, Dick was a defense. He coached on both sides of the ball, but he was a defense first guy. And he was, you win by not turning the ball over. You win with the run game, and you win with defense, number one, and special teams. And so I became fanatical about ball security. As an offensive coach, I wanted to make sure we played great defense. You can win a lot of games if you can hold them down. And but Dick didn't want to be just like any other offense either. So that's why when he went to Arizona, actually, I was at Georgia Tech heading to Alabama. He was at Hawaii heading to Arizona, and he called me and he offered me the coordinator's job at Arizona initially. And I go, Coach, I mean, I got a chance to go to Alabama, and he didn't take anything against him about that, and didn't say. And he goes, the only thing he said to me is, "Are you sure?" And he knew the climate at Arizona or Alabama, and I was an outsider. And sure enough, a year later, he's bailing me out.
Mm-hmm.
But I think his style of coaching philosophically in today's game would still be current, because you would play great defense. You would be different on offense. He didn't want to do line up back in that day, just line up in the I formation and run toss sweep and run. We had to be creative and innovative and use formations and motions and shifts. And then when he went to Arizona, he started incorporating the option offense, and it was Ben Griffith was the offensive coordinator, and it was the flex bone type things, because his thought was they can't defend that in the Pac-12, Pac-10 or Pac-8 at that time, whatever it was, because they don't see it. So I would say in today's climate, he would be the same with special teams and offense. And the other thing that I learned from him as a head coach, and I took with me, is special teams is an offensive. It's a offensive weapon. You don't just kick the ball and cover. You find ways to get an extra possession. You have an onside kicks. You have fake punts. You have fake field goals, and not just have them, but use them and call them. And the other thing I learned from him as a head coach is it's easy to have those things, but when it comes time to call them in a game, you start getting a little tight and you go, oh, and you talk yourself out of it. So what he would do, and I learned this from him, and I would do this with my teams, he would say, hey, listen, second time we kick off, we're using this fake onside kick. So now here you are, you can't back down. We're kicking off the second time. The players are going, Coach, you said we're going to go onside kick, and we did. And most of the time we were successful, but you put it out there. We're going to fake the punt. The second time we punt, we're faking this. So the first time we kick a field goal, we're doing this. I mean, and you put it out there to the players, you got to stick with it.
Yeah. I will never forget. It was probably the first practice I ever covered. And we had a freshman tailback, and he was just kind of lollygagging with the ball in his hand. And one of our DBs or linebacker, somebody knocks it out and recovers it. And the defense goes insane. Like, this is before practice has even started, first practice. And, the tailback's like, what just happened? Well, that was a thing that happened all season, ball hawks. And if the offensive player turned it over, he had to do up downs, and the defense celebrated. And I've not been around a team before or since that so celebrated a defensive takeaway or offense securing the ball. Because likewise, if a defender tried to rip the ball out and the running back would hold it tight, the offense would celebrate that they didn't turn it over. And it was just a cultural thing that one possession could make the difference between a win and a loss. And that was from minute zero of our season. It's
a deep cultural thing with him and highly ingrained in me. Right now I'm working as an analyst at UAB with Trent Dilfer, who I coached at the Browns years ago. And, we had to, in front of the staff, just kind of give our opinions of where we need. And I said, listen, I know you guys all think we teach ball security. We're not anywhere close. I mean, we have to be maniacal, fanatical, because that's what Dick was. I mean, if you had the ball in your hand, it doesn't matter if you were in a rep or just standing there, it had to be held high and tight to your, and either it was in your hand like that or you gave it to the manager. But if you couldn't just stand there with a ball in your hand. And it just creates an awareness throughout the team. And that's why Dick's teams were so good taking the ball away, but so good not turning it over.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen that. I've seen undergraduate student managers who would secure the ball because they knew that the defense was going to try to strip it out.
If somebody threw me a ball, I'd be sitting there like this. I didn't want to get yelled at.
Absolutely. Well, looking back, how do you think Coach Tomey's coaching style and philosophy has impacted the broader football community? We kind of alluded to this, but what's his lasting legacy on the game of football?
I think it's the fact. I think when Dick first started out at Hawaii, before the success followed his philosophy, he was kind of a little bit of an outlier. Everybody's like, this guy's a little quirky. And he wasn't afraid to express his opinions about things like that. But then the more success he had, and as he built the UH program and then went to U of A, and then that success started, he became, I believe, one of the more highly respected coaches in the business. And people started to see the value of, hey, this is more than just football. This is relationship based. And going back to what I said earlier, if they know that you care about them and you spend time getting to know their family and getting to know their, what makes them tick and know what they're doing academically, they're going to play better for you and play harder and give you just a little bit more and give you a little bit of an edge. And I think that those of us that worked with him or for him, and those that got to know him in the coaching community, saw the value in that, hey, this guy's a little bit out there with this stuff, but look at the results he's getting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Dick would not, in today's world, there would be, I'm sure there would be players leaving his team, transferring in but not very many, because they, that relationship, whether it could offset some of the big NIL money, I'm not sure, but that relationship based thinking was so strong, and it kept it, even the bottom of the roster, they felt engaged, they felt part of it. They were important. They had a voice. Yeah. And he wanted players to have an open relationship with their coaches. You come in here and tell your coach what you're thinking. Mm-hmm. Tell him exactly what you're thinking. He's going to tell you what he's going to be honest with you, but you be honest with him. And that honesty and that credibility that you built with your players, I think it went eons. It created such an impact on the field, on game day, on the practice field. That had a lot to do with coach's success.
Yep. I was at Texas Tech for quite a while, so I see some similarities between Coach Leach and Coach Tomey, and that kind of quirky and not necessarily being at the powerhouse program, so doing things differently. Am I breaking up on you? How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I got you now.
Okay. So I was at Texas Tech for a while, and I've seen, interestingly, some parallels between Mike Leach and Coach Tomey in that they weren't at the most heavily resourced school in their conference. So they had to do things differently. They had to recruit differently and switch things up. And also with both of them, they're right at the cusp. They're just shy of that 600 winning percentage to make it into the College Football Hall of Fame. But if you look at the schools that Coach Tomey took over and what he inherited, it really seems unfair that he isn't eligible because he's at a San Jose State or at a U of H or even an Arizona, where maybe the tradition isn't, the expectation isn't win 9-10 games a year. It's get bowl eligible, and we've had a good year. What are your thoughts on the fact that Coach Tomey's career falls short of College Football Hall of Fame status?
I think he's in my Hall of Fame. I think that it's a great injustice because, as you said, what he has taken over, when he took over at the U of A, what he took over at the UH was a mess. I think we went 5-6 that first year. We didn't have a chance. People wouldn't give us a chance to win a game. San Jose, when they were way down before Dick got them turned around, and obviously Brent did a good job following, years later. But I think it's an injustice, and there should be consideration for some subjectivity of where was this, what were the circumstances, because he's truly, to me, one of the very best coaches that ever put a whistle around his neck.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate your time. I got one last one here as we wrap up. If you had a chance to sit down with Coach Tomey today and have one last conversation with him, what would you say and why?
First of all, I'd say thank you. Get emotional here. Dick, I was fortunate. I started my coaching career out at Penn State with Coach Paterno, who I knew since I was 5 years old. Good friend of my dad's. Bill Curry, amazing guy. But Dick probably had the single biggest impact on my career of all those guys. But collectively, they did too. But in terms of the things that I learned from him uh, about just being a head coach, building a program, being a coach, not even a head coach, being a coach, uh, developing players, developing relationships, building a staff, developing a staff. Um, but when I say thank you, my career would not be anywhere near it was if it weren't for Dick. I mean, he kept me on at the UH when he didn't have to. I mean, maybe he had to. He didn't. After our first year, I was literally riding with him to go see a recruit. Keith Iowan played at Kamehameha High School, big time prospect in the island, and we got him, and it was a big thing. And we're riding to go see him right before the signing date, and he said, what are you, Michelle? Are you going to look at buying anything? And I was like, well, Coach, I don't even know if I'm going to be here next year, because we were on like a probationary status. And he goes, oh yeah, you're fine. You're part of the permanent staff. And I was going, well, I wish at some point you would have told me this. But he, at every turn, every opportunity I had, there is some way, shape, or form it connected back to Dick. Mm-hmm. It might be 3 or 4 layers down, but it connected. But he bailed me out at Hawaii. He bailed me out when I got fired at Alabama. I heard you talk about his last season in 2000. I got fired at Memphis the week before he was fired. And my son, I took my son, who was about, I guess Scott was maybe a freshman in college. And I said, listen, we're going to Dick's. I talked to Dick. He called me right after I got fired. And he said, listen, I'm probably right behind you. So I booked a flight. It was Thanksgiving weekend. We flew in to Tucson Friday, we're on the sidelines of the game for Dick's last game. 'Cause I wanted to be there. It was important to me to be there. Why they ever made that move, I don't know. But and then we went over to the house afterwards and shared stories and laugh and whatever. But I owe him. I've been in this business now going on 51 years, and I've had I've been blessed to be at 3 NFL teams and about 15 major colleges, and none of that would have been the case if it hadn't been for Dick Tomey in my life, in my career, in terms of what I learned from him, and then how he would try to help me advance my career by calling people and getting in touch with people.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Coach, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate the insights. I know Coach Tomey meant so much to so many. And it's been a real pleasure to kind of connect with people that I didn't even know about before. I had a list of people I knew I wanted to talk to, and then Mike comes out of the woodwork and he suggests you. So it just shows me that his reach, I knew it was extensive before, but it extends, decades and generations. And it really was tremendous that the impact that he could have with people.
You don't have enough podcasts available to get everybody on that would want to talk to you about Dick Tomey. When Mike was going on, he said, hey, I'm going to give Toby your information. And then when you reached out to me almost the next day, I said, to talk about Dick Tomey, it's, it's so easy. And I owe him so much. So yes, awesome. Thank you. Thank you for including me.
Well, thank you. Last little bit, I always stitch this in. I have my guests introduce themselves however they would, and the name of the show is Becoming Undone. So my name's Toby Brooks, and I am Undone. That's how I would do that, if you could do that for me.
My name is Rip Scherer, and I've had the pleasure of being on Becoming Undone. It's been a great thrill.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop the recording there.